Stop bleeding money in trades now. That's a phrase I've heard more times than I can count. And yet, most men who come into this game never understand what it really means until their account is nothing more than a graveyard of broken hopes. Why is that? Why is it that the very thing they swore they would never do becomes the only thing they end up doing? I'll tell you. Because the market has a way of stripping you bare, not with a whip, not with a knife, but with your own mind. You see, money isn't lost in the market by accident. It's lost because of stubbornness. It's lost because of impatience. It's lost because a man wants to be right more than he wants to be rich. Haven't you ever found yourself clinging to a position just because you didn't want to admit you were wrong? And while you sit there, paralyzed, the tape keeps ticking, and the loss keeps growing until what was once a scratch becomes a wound, and that wound becomes a hemorrhage. That's how traders bleed to death. Now, I don't speak about this from books or theories. I speak because I've bled myself. I've sat in my own little office staring at the tape, watching the market laugh at me. I've taken tips, ignored my own rules, doubled down on losers, and prayed for reversals that never came. Do you know what prayer gets you in Wall Street? The Undertaker. It's not the big losses that kill most men, it's the steady drip, drip, drip of small ones that they refuse to cut. They say, I'll give it just a little more time, but time is not on your side in this game. Time is the enemy of a bad position. Did you ever notice how fast a loss runs against you, compared to how slow a profit crawls in your favor? That's no accident. That's the law of the market. And yet, men keep hoping the law will be suspended for them. Tell me, has the market ever bent its rules for you? Has it ever shown you mercy because you begged it to? I learned long ago that the tape does not care who you are. It doesn't care how smart you think you are, or how much studying you've done. It doesn't care about your plans, your dreams, your family, or your rent money. The tape only reflects one thing, the combined will of the crowd, expressed in dollars. And when you fight that crowd with nothing but your ego, you will lose. Every time. But here's the cruel trick. The same mind that lets you make money in this business is the very mind that makes you lose it. A trader who once cut losses fast, the moment he gets cocky, the moment he thinks he has the market figured out, he stops cutting. He hesitates. He lets that little red line grow, and soon enough, the habit of discipline is gone, replaced by the habit of hope. Do you know the cost of hope in Wall Street? It's measured in bankruptcies. The reason men bleed is simply they refuse to take the small medicine, so they end up in the grave. Think about it. Isn't it easier to accept a scratch than to wait for a bullet? Isn't it easier to step aside when you're wrong than to watch your fortune melt away? And yet, why don't men do it? Pride. That's all it is. Pride and the desire to be right. But this business doesn't pay you for being right, it pays you for making money. I'll give you an example. A man buys a stock at 50. It dips to 48. He tells himself, it's only 2 points. It'll come back. At 45, he says, this is ridiculous. It's oversold. At 42, he mutters, the market's wrong. I'm right. By the time it hits 38, he's no longer trading, he's praying. And when it finally collapses to 30, he either sells in despair or he goes broke holding on. Now tell me, what killed that man? Was it the market? No, it was himself. It was his refusal to take a 2-point loss that destroyed him. He thought he was saving himself pain, but all he did was trade a scratch for a bullet wound. And the strangest part, that same man, after licking his wounds, will do the same thing all over again. Haven't you seen it? Haven't you felt it yourself? Why do we repeat the same mistakes, even when we swear we'll never do it again? Because in this business, memory is short, and hope is eternal. That combination is deadly. Let me tell you something, the market is the most expensive place in the world to learn how to control yourself. And yet, most traders refuse to learn until they've paid tuition with blood. They want the excitement, the gamble, the story. They don't want the discipline. But the discipline is the only thing that saves you from bleeding out. Now, you might be sitting there asking yourself, all right, but how do I stop bleeding? How do I fix it? And I'll answer you in the simplest way I know. Cut your losses. Cut them quickly. Cut them without hesitation. Don't argue, don't rationalize, don't pray. Just cut. The very moment you know you're wrong, the very second the tape proves you wrong, get out. No hesitation. Do you hesitate when your hand touches a hot stove? No, you pull it back immediately. Why? Because you know delay means pain. Why then do traders leave their hands on the hot stove of a bad trade? Because they're not afraid of pain, they're afraid of admitting they were wrong. And that's the tragedy of trading. A man will lose his entire fortune just to avoid the sting of his own pride. The truth is, trading is not a game of making money, it's a game of not losing it. Money takes care of itself when you're right. You don't need to force profits. The tape will carry you. But when you're wrong, if you don't act quick, the market will carry you out. That's the whole secret. Stop bleeding by refusing to bleed in the first place. Simple, isn't it? But tell me, do you think simple means easy? I can tell you, after a lifetime in this game, that nothing is harder than doing the simple thing. Nothing is harder than clicking that button and taking the loss while your mind screams at you to wait just a little longer. Do you know why it's so hard? Because it feels like defeat, and men hate to feel defeated. But let me ask you what's worse, admitting defeat quickly or dragging it out until it destroys you? Most traders never learn this. They treat each trade as though it were a personal battle, a duel between themselves and the market. But the market is not your enemy. It's not even your opponent. The market doesn't care about you at all. The only enemy you face is yourself, and if you don't master that enemy, you will bleed. I remember one time I held a losing position far too long. It was early in my career, back when I thought I had the market figured out. The stock went against me, and instead of selling, I doubled up. You know the old gambler's trick, throw more money at a bad hand, pray for a turnaround. But the tape didn't turn. It went further against me. My loss doubled, then tripled. And I sat there watching, sick to my stomach, refusing to act. Do you know what I told myself? It can't go any lower. That's the most expensive sentence a trader will ever say. Of course it went lower. By the time I finally got out, I was nearly wiped clean. That lesson cost me a fortune. And yet, looking back, it was the cheapest lesson I ever bought, because it taught me to never, ever let a small loss turn into a big one. But I didn't learn it once. I had to learn it a dozen times, each lesson carved into me by the market. You might think you're immune, that you're too smart, too disciplined. But let me tell you, the moment you think you're immune is the very moment you're most vulnerable. Haven't you noticed that? Haven't you noticed how the market waits for your cockiest moment to humble you? So if you really want to stop bleeding money, you must give up the idea that you'll ever conquer the market. You won't. The best you can do is master yourself. And mastering yourself means cutting fast, cutting clean, and never looking back. It means having rules and following them no matter how much it hurts. Because the only way to survive this game is to treat survival as your first profit. Now, you may be asking, but what if I cut a loss and then the market turns back in my favor? Doesn't that mean I missed out? And the answer is yes, sometimes it will. Sometimes you'll cut and watch the tape reverse, and you'll feel foolish. But let me ask you, what's the price of insurance? Isn't a small premium worth paying to protect yourself from ruin? That's what a cut loss is. It's the premium you pay for staying alive. And as long as you're alive, there will always be another trade. Always. But a dead trader makes no trades. Small losses are medicine, ignore them, and they become fatal wounds. That's not just a catchy phrase to toss around in a lecture hall. That's the lifeblood of every trader who has ever survived in this business longer than a season. You see, men come into the market full of confidence, full of clever ideas, with charts, theories, and a heart beating with ambition. They think the real game is about catching the big win, the home run, the story they'll brag about at the club. But do you know what keeps a man in the market long enough to ever see those big wins? It's not brilliance, it's not courage, it's not even luck. It's the simple, painful willingness to take the small medicine. Now, let me ask you something. When was the last time you took a small loss willingly, almost gratefully? Most men never do. They fight it, they resist it, they talk themselves out of it. They say, it's just a dip, it'll come back, and maybe once in a while, it does. But sooner or later, the same attitude that saved them for a day destroys them for a lifetime. Because when you get used to ignoring the scratch, you get accustomed to living with infection. And infection in this business spreads fast. I've seen men who could have been great traders bury themselves under nothing more than a refusal to swallow that little pill of pain. They treat the small loss as an insult, something beneath their pride. But tell me, is it pride you're after, or profit? Do you want to be the man who brags about never being wrong, or the man who still has money in his account when the dust settles? The truth is, every small loss you accept is like paying an insurance premium. It's not fun, it's not exciting, but it keeps you safe. And the irony is, the small losses are the only thing keeping you alive long enough to see the big gains. If you fight them, if you dodge them, if you pretend you don't need them, you'll wake up one morning and find that what was once a manageable little setback has turned into a fatal hemorrhage. Haven't you noticed how fast a bad trade can snowball when you refuse to cut it? How quickly that paper cut on your account balance becomes a deep gash, and then a wound you can't recover from. When I say small losses are medicine, I mean they're not just tolerable, they're necessary. They're part of the cure. Every trader who lasts knows that the cost of admission to the next opportunity is sometimes nothing more than a 2-point loss, a quick exit, a shrug of the shoulders. That's the fee you pay to stay alive in this game. And yet, most men choke on that fee. They see it as robbery instead of tuition. Think of it this way. Would you rather pay the doctor for a minor checkup, or wait until you're on the operating table for something far worse? In trading, cutting a small loss is that checkup. Ignoring it is like pretending you're healthy while the disease spreads quietly through your system. By the time you finally admit the truth, it's too late, and the cost is everything you've got. And here's another thing, do you know why small losses hurt so much more than they should? Because they bruise the ego. It's not the dollars that sting, it's the confession. It's having to look yourself in the eye and say, I was wrong. And most men would rather risk ruin than admit that. Haven't you done it yourself? Haven't you sat there watching a trade drift further and further against you, inventing reasons why you're still right, why the market is wrong, why you just need to give it more time? All because you couldn't stand the idea of taking a small hit. But the market doesn't grade you on pride. It doesn't hand out trophies for stubbornness. The only score that matters is survival, and survival comes from cutting the infection before it spreads. A scratch is nothing, 2 points, 3 points, a minor wound you can shake off. But when you let it grow, when you let that infection fester, it becomes the end of you. I remember once watching a man who started with $500,000 in the market. He was clever, too clever for his own good. Every time a trade went against him, he'd say, it's just noise, it'll come back. He let a 2-point loss become 5, then 10, then 20. He still wouldn't cut. He called it conviction. I called it suicide. Within a year, he was out of the game. Not because the market hated him, not because he lacked brains, but because he refused to swallow the small pill. He wanted to skip the medicine and still stay healthy. But the market doesn't work that way. And don't fool yourself into thinking this rule doesn't apply to you. Every man believes he's the exception, the one who can dodge the law of small losses. But tell me, have you ever met a trader who went broke from taking too many small cuts? I haven't, but I've met 1,000 who went broke from refusing to take any. Small losses are the guardrails on the mountain road. They keep you from going over the cliff. They sting, yes, but they save your life. The cliff is ruin, and ruin is what waits for the man who insists on ignoring the guardrails. Do you think the market cares about how strongly you feel, how convinced you are, how much you've invested in your story? It doesn't. The market will send you over the edge just the same. The discipline to cut quickly is not just about money, it's about building a habit. Every time you cut a small loss, you're training yourself to survive. You're teaching your mind that survival comes first, that ego doesn't pay the bills, that safety is the seed from which profit grows. Ignore that habit, and you're teaching yourself the opposite, that pride matters more than survival, that the market owes you a reversal, that you're smarter than the tape. Do you know where that road leads? Straight to ruin. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the small loss is not your enemy, it's your best friend in disguise. It's the market whispering to you, you're wrong here, step aside. Ignore that whisper, and it turns into a scream. Ignore the scream, and it becomes a disaster. The longer you wait, the higher the price. So the medicine, bitter as it is, must be taken. Because in this game you don't die from one big punch, you die from the cuts you refuse to close. The blood drains slowly, quietly, and by the time you notice, it's too late to stop it. That's why the men who last are the ones who treat every scratch seriously, who never hesitate to stitch the wound before it spreads. And if you think you can escape that rule, if you think you can hold on just a little longer and somehow cheat the market's law, I'll ask you again, have you ever seen it work for anyone in the long run? The market doesn't care about your pride, it only cares about price. That's a truth every trader swears he understands, but when the time comes to prove it, most men collapse under the weight of their own vanity. They think the market is a stage for them to show off how clever they are, how well they can predict, how right they can be. But the market is no stage, and it has no audience. It's a machine that measures one thing and one thing, only the willingness of men to back their opinions with money. And money doesn't care about your feelings, your theories, or your pride. It flows where the tape demands it to flow. Tell me, have you ever caught yourself defending a trade the way a man defends his reputation? As though being wrong on the market was the same as being wrong in life. That's the trap. That's the poison of pride. Because when you tie your self-worth to the outcome of a trade, you stop looking at price and start looking at your reflection. And reflections don't move markets. Only price does. I've watched men lose fortunes, not because they lacked the capital or the opportunity, but because they confused the scoreboard with their own ego. They thought being right mattered more than following the tape. They held on to losers because admitting defeat felt unbearable. But let me ask you, what's worse, swallowing a small bruise to your pride, or swallowing bankruptcy papers? Because that's the choice most traders face, and too many of them would rather ruin themselves than admit the market has proved them wrong. The market is the coldest judge you'll ever stand before. It doesn't hand out mercy, and it doesn't care if you've had a string of bad luck. It doesn't care if you've been studying charts all night, or if you've got mouths to feed at home. It doesn't care if you've had a run of winners and feel invincible. The only language it speaks is price, up or down, profit or loss. And when you ignore that language, because your pride insists you must be right, you're not trading anymore, you're gambling with your life's work. Think about it. If the market cared about your pride, wouldn't it reward you for sticking stubbornly to a position? Wouldn't it bend to your conviction just because you refused to yield? But has it ever once done that for you? When your stock keeps falling, does it suddenly reverse because you shouted at the screen? Or because you wrote a convincing argument in your head about why you can't possibly be wrong? No. Price moves where it wants, with or without your approval. I remember once being long in a stock that I was absolutely certain would rise. I had the logic, the background, the story, everything lined up neatly in my head. And for a while, it did rise. But then, suddenly, it turned. Not a little dip, not a pause, but a steady grind against me. I refused to sell. I told myself I can't be wrong. The market's just shaking out the weak hands. That's what pride told me. But pride doesn't pay. Price kept sinking. Every point lower wasn't just money gone, it was another nail in the coffin of my discipline. I stayed, I held, I prayed. And when I finally got out, it wasn't because I chose to, it was because I had no more choice. Pride had chewed through my account like a disease, and I had paid dearly for believing the market cared about my opinion. That's when I learned the lesson so many ignore: price is reality, everything else is imagination. You can imagine reasons, you can imagine reversals, you can imagine justice, But the only truth that counts is the number on the tape. And the tape is deaf to your pride. You've seen it in others too, haven't you? A man defending his losing trade with arguments that sound more like a courtroom plea than a strategy. It's undervalued. The fundamentals are strong. It can't go lower. Those are not trading decisions. They're prayers dressed up as logic. And they all come from pride, the refusal to admit the market is bigger than me, and I am wrong. Do you know what's strange about pride in this business? It's the only thing men cling to while everything else slips away. They'll watch their capital drain, their confidence crumble, their families worry, but they'll still cling to the one thing that does them no good, the belief that they can't be wrong. Pride keeps them chained to the very position that's destroying them. And when the final margin call comes, they're left with nothing but the memory of how badly they wanted to be right. Now, consider the opposite kind of trader, the one who kills his pride quickly, who doesn't argue with price, who treats being wrong as nothing more than a cost of doing business. That man doesn't bleed for long. He cuts, he moves on, he survives. Does he look foolish sometimes? Yes. Does he take losses? Of course. But he's still in the game. Pride hasn't put him out of business. And isn't that the only thing that matters staying in the game? The paradox is this: the less you care about being right, the more right you'll end up being. Because you'll follow the tape, not your ego. You'll accept the market's verdict without argument. And in doing so, you'll keep yourself safe from the fatal wound that pride always delivers. Think of the market as a mirror. If you walk up to a mirror and see something ugly, does shouting at it change your reflection? No. The mirror shows what it shows. The tape is the same. It reflects price. It reflects the actions of millions of other men, each voting with his money. You are one of those men, but you are not the crowd. And the crowd is always bigger than you. The crowd will push the tape wherever it wants. And your pride, your stubbornness, your conviction, it means nothing to that crowd. Do you understand that? This is why I always say the market is never wrong. Men are wrong, constantly. But the tape, never. The tape shows the truth in numbers, and those numbers are carved into reality. When you fight the tape with nothing but your pride, you're not arguing with an opinion, you're arguing with fact. And fact wins every single time. So when you catch yourself clinging to a trade because you want to prove something, stop and ask yourself, prove it to who? Who's watching? Who cares? Do you think the market is going to send you a letter congratulating you for standing your ground? Do you think it will reward you with profit just because you refuse to back down? The market doesn't hand out medals. It only hands out profits and losses. And the trader who understands that leaves pride at the door and takes only what price allows him to take. You cannot bend the market to your will, but you can bend your will to the market. That's the only choice you have. And the moment you accept that the market doesn't care about your pride, you'll stop bleeding for it. You'll stop throwing good money after bad just to avoid admitting you were wrong. You'll stop defending the indefensible. And in that humility, you'll find survival. A losing trade never turns into a winner because you wish it so. That's the simplest truth you'll ever hear about this business, and yet it's the hardest truth for most men to accept. A trader will sit there, his position bleeding, and instead of acting, he starts wishing. He wishes the price back up to his entry. He wishes for a reversal. He wishes for the market to forgive him. But the market has never once cared about a man's wishes, and it never will. Price goes where price wants to go, and your wishing has no more power over it than a child's plea has over the tide. Haven't you ever caught yourself staring at the screen, begging silently for the next tick to turn in your favor? Haven't you ever watched your position sink, and instead of cutting it, you said to yourself, just let it come back to even, and I'll get out? That's the most dangerous lie a trader tells himself. Because what you're really saying is, I'm willing to risk everything I have for the satisfaction of being made whole again. And while you're wishing, while you're bargaining with fate, the tape keeps moving against you. It doesn't pause to listen. It doesn't care about your promises. The moment a trade starts going wrong, the market is telling you something. It's whispering the truth right there in black and white. But most men refuse to listen. They cover their ears with hope. They think hope will buy them time, that somehow, by the sheer force of wishing, the market will reverse and prove them right. But tell me, when has hope ever moved a price one tick? Have you ever seen a stock reverse because you prayed for it? No. The only thing hope does is paralyze you while your loss grows larger. I remember a fellow trader years ago, a man with more theories than discipline. He bought into a stock at 70, convinced it was a bargain. Within days, it slipped to 68. He refused to sell. It'll come back, he said. At 65, he was still calm. At 60, he was muttering about manipulation. At 55, he stopped talking altogether and just sat there staring at the screen. By 50, his account was gutted. Do you know what he said to me afterward? He said, "I just kept wishing it would turn around." That was his entire plan, wishful thinking. And the market cleaned him out without even noticing. A losing trade doesn't turn into a winner because you wish it. It doesn't turn into a winner because you argue with it, or because you write down a dozen reasons why it should. The tape doesn't read your notes. The tape doesn't care about logic or fairness. It only moves according to the weight of buying and selling. And when that weight is against you, the only rational move is to step aside. Yet most men do the opposite. They cling harder. They double down. They say, if I just add more, it'll come back quicker. That's not trading, that's digging your own grave with both hands. Do you know what the real tragedy is? It's not the loss itself. Losses are part of this business. The tragedy is how many traders let a manageable loss become a disaster because they were waiting for a miracle. They confuse hope with strategy. They confuse wishing with action. And in this game, inaction is death. Every tick against you is another cut, another ounce of blood gone, and the longer you wait, the weaker you get. Now, why do men fall into this trap? Why do they keep wishing instead of cutting? Pride, yes, but also fear. They're afraid of locking in the loss. They're afraid of admitting defeat. So they pretend that if they don't act, maybe the problem will solve itself. It's like a man with a leaking roof who refuses to patch it because he hopes the rain will stop. Maybe it does for a day, but the damage is already done, and the next storm will finish the job. In trading, the storm never ends. There's always another tick, another move, another surprise. If you don't patch the leak, if you don't cut the loser, you'll drown. I've seen this pattern repeat so many times that I could call it the law of traders. A man buys, it goes against him, he wishes it back. It sinks further, he wishes harder. By the time he finally accepts reality, he's too weak to recover. And what's worse, once he's out, the pain of watching the tape afterward convinces him that the market has betrayed him personally. But the market hasn't betrayed him. He betrayed himself by thinking his wishes mattered. And let's be honest, haven't you done the same? Haven't you sat there, refusing to sell, just waiting for the miracle that never comes? Be honest with yourself. Every trader has done it. The difference between those who survive and those who go under is simple. The survivors learn the lesson. They learn that wishing is poison. They learn that the only cure is decisive action. They stop waiting for miracles and start cutting the moment the market proves them wrong. Think about the absurdity of it. If you went to a casino and lost a hand of cards, would you sit there and wish the dealer would reshuffle in your favor? No, the game moves on. The loss is gone. But in the market, because the tape keeps running, men trick themselves into thinking their wish has a chance. They believe the story in their head more than the story in the price. And that's why they lose. A losing trade is like spoiled fruit. The moment you realize it's rotten, you throw it out. You don't keep it on the table hoping it'll become fresh again. But in the market, men do exactly that. They hold on to rotten trades, convinced they'll ripen back into profit, if only they wait. And all the while, the stink grows stronger, until it fills their whole account. Wishing is not harmless. It's not just wasted time. It's active destruction. Because every moment you spend wishing is a moment you could have spent cutting, regrouping, finding the next opportunity. While you're trapped in the prison of hope, The market keeps moving, and the traders who accept reality are already taking your money. They're on the other side of your wish, and they're cashing in while you sit there paralyzed. Do you know the greatest relief a trader ever feels? It's not catching a big winner. It's cutting a loser and finally being free of the weight of wishing. Once you take the medicine, the wishing stops. You can breathe again. You can think clearly. But as long as you're holding on, as long as you're waiting for the impossible, your mind is chained, your capital is chained, and your future is chained. So remember, no amount of wishing can turn a loser into a winner. No amount of praying, no amount of reasoning, no amount of time. The tape will do what it does, and your job is not to hope, it's to act. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you stop bleeding. Time is the enemy of a bad position. I learned that lesson so many times, and each time it came with a price I'd rather not remember. You see, most traders treat time as their ally. They think if they wait long enough, the market will reward them, that patience will somehow turn a bad trade into a good one. But in this business, patience is a double-edged sword.